SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Morning there, Rhino.
Howdy, howdy.
How was your Easter?
Glorious.
Awesome. It was a little
Caught
chilly.
up on sleep.
Oh, you caught up on sleep.
It's always a good weekend when you can get to a point in the day where you're like, you know what, I'm going to have a nap.
I hear you. I love it. It was a little chilly yesterday. It was warmish on Friday and Saturday. We, of course, enjoyed the day off on Friday, had the best of airing, but it turned off to be a little rainy Saturday night, and then that ushered in a cold front, a little chilly on Easter Sunday. But back to that glorious springtime normal weather across the Magnolia State, it looks like this week. So I attended Saturday Vigil in the Catholic Church. Saturday evening is maybe the longest Mass of the liturgical year. Starts out in the dark with candles and numerous readings. It's about a 2-hour, 15-minute ordeal altogether. But the reason is because those newcomers who have been studying to join the Catholic Church, they, in fact, receive either one or two of the initial sacraments in the Catholic Church, baptism, confirmation, that officially kind of initiates them in. And we had a number of newcomers and a couple of young friends, a couple that were among them, and it was well done. We really thoroughly enjoyed that. And, in fact, I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but there is a surge in new Catholics returning to the church, lots of new members. Actually, I think it's probably more fair to call it maybe a return because there was an exodus. And in general, church going is down in this country. And there seems to be a return to religion in church in general in this country. But, man, packed houses in the Catholic churches. And, of course, now even a more acute problem is the shortage of priests, which has always been a problem. But it's become even a little more exacerbated. Holy Cathedral in the Archdiocese of Chicago said, we had 6 masses so far last night and a few this morning, and all of them have been packed. So, good to see. Meanwhile, over there across the pond, King Charles, he hosted I hope I say this correctly, I'm not familiar with this, Iftar, I-F-T-A-R, Ramadan event for Muslims in Windsor Castle. But no Easter message in Windsor Castle. What the heck's up with that? Is it fair to say the UK has been conquered by the Muslims? This is unbelievable. I don't get it. And I'm looking at video of it in Windsor Castle. The Muslims, of course, they're in the castle with the Ramadan going on, all kneeling on the carpets. I don't know all their cultural practices, but I can tell it's something unique and specific.
The most common practice people associate with Ramadan is fasting during daylight hours.
Okay. Well, it's clear that those inside the castle there are observing those various practices. What's up with that? Because this seems upside down to me. Okay, if you wanted to give them a little time, maybe. But just abandon and ignore a traditional Easter Christian message from Windsor Castle by the king? What the heck? I don't know.
Well, he is a pretty weak king.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I just found that to be a bit fascinating. And who could forget 2024? I can't. I remember talking about this. Remember this from President Joseph R. Biden, President of the United States, where he issued a proclamation by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim March 31st, 2024, that was Easter, as Transgender Day of Visibility. What could be more important on Easter than that? I call upon all Americans to join us in lifting up the lives and voices of transgender people throughout our nation and to work toward eliminating violence and discrimination based on gender identity. In other words, not your biological gender, but the gender for which you identify. Gee. Seems like that was forever ago, but it wasn't. A short 2 years ago. And that was, felt like it was designed to be in your face, did it not, on Easter? Like of all the things, that's what you come up with? Seriously? Incredible. So those days are gone. Meanwhile, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, he not too happy, needless to say, with the Iranians, and wow, did he ever issue a strong message yesterday, giving them again, the Iranians, 48 hours to get it right and open up the strait. And he did not, shall we say, mince any words. His language quite strong in that respect that he posted on his Truth Social platform. Man, he put the big-time threat on them to open up the strait in 48 hours. He says, time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down. That's R-E-I-G, and down on them. Glory be to God. He got pretty serious. He says, open up, in all caps, open the Hormuz Strait, take the oil and make a fortune. It would be a gusher for the world. He is imploring them to get it done. And we will see. At this point, kind of hard to tell what's going to happen. But again, the president not mincing any words whatsoever, calling on them to open up the strait. Dropped an F-bomb in there as well yesterday. That was kind of interesting. Said, open up the effing strait, you bastards, is what he said. Crazy, I think. That was an unusual message, to say the least, on Easter Sunday. I think he's frustrated. Frustrated with the lack of action on the part of the Iranians to get the heck out of the way and open up the Hormuz Strait. Makes a threat and says we are going to start blowing the place up. Actually, I believe he said Power Plant and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one. There will be nothing like it. Open the F Strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. Praise be to Allah, President Donald J. Trump. That on a Truth Social post. That was really something. On Saturdays, when he threatened to rain all hell down on Iran as the U.S. heads towards a self-imposed deadline on Monday. I think he's scheduled to address the nation at 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock our time. Meantime, the United States military, are they good or what? Missing American airmen inside the country rescued. What an operation that was. If there's any question that the U.S. military is the most sophisticated, the most powerful, the most professional, the strongest in the world, there should not be after this operation. Shot down over Iran, used the homing device. I think he found some high spot within the country to hide out. Isn't that what you understand, Rhino? Yeah. And had the beacon, if you will. They were able to locate him, extract him. Unbelievable job by the United States military. Big salute. We're stepping aside for a break. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. Stay with us.
At Fillmore Buick.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Now back to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. We've got Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, on Middays at 11:05 today. Mr. Towner recently testified before Congress concerning the United States budget. And, of course, the President released his proposed budget this past Friday. That is in accordance with our laws. The White House submits a proposed budget over there to the Congress, sends it over. We talked about that last week. Quite the procession that Rhino dreamed up for that one, envisioned for that one, to get that mountain of papers down there from the White House down to the Capitol so the legislators could take a look at it. It includes $500 billion of additional spending on the United States military, that increasing spending on the Department of War by some 50% to about $1.5 trillion. Also, it calls for a reduction of discretionary spending that is considered and categorized as non-defense domestic spending. That would just be the gigantic agency complex of the United States federal government. Generally speaking, on the discretionary side of the spending ledger, it's usually split half and half. Half for the non-defense, half for defense. Those are appropriated on an annual basis. That's the way the budget works. So, and they've been steadily increasing through the years, the amounts appropriated to each of those functional categories of spending. This year, you're looking, though, at a massive increase in defense war spending. The president said last week, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, Rhino, but he said, we don't have money for Medicare and Medicaid and daycare, et cetera, that we're in the middle of a war, and our priority is funding those aspects of federal government, of the federal government. So I don't know how much that got picked up by the media, but he said that Wednesday, actually, while he was speaking. And that kind of raises the question, in my view, as to how the states should react, because you look at the Medicaid program, that's one that's gotten a lot of attention under the dome here in Mississippi. It has always been the second biggest line item of spending in the state's budget, second to education. And the Medicaid folks came over this year and said, we need $300 million more on top of the $900 million and change that was spent on the program for fiscal year 25. Actually, pardon me, that would be fiscal year 26. We're now budgeting for fiscal year 27. So, looks like that they're going to get about two-thirds of what they requested, $200 million additional funding from the legislature, and that resulted in our legislature reducing the amount appropriated, earmarked for teacher pay raises. It's pretty much what they're saying. Hey, the budget was tighter than we thought, and sorry there, teachers, where you had the House offering, I went through the sequence last week. It started out as $2,000 a year from the Senate. The House comes back with HB2, the big education freedom bill, also included teacher pay raises that suggested $5,000. That the proposed amount in HB2. The Senate responded with a counter of $6,000, phased in $2,000 a year over 3. They ended up settling, after all that, on $2,000. As far as I can tell, Rhino, after the legislature left for town on Friday, their sine die is what it looks like at this point, but the lieutenant governor said, stay by your phone, I'm paraphrasing here, might be back. They passed a rule, as you know, that allows them to be called back by the middle of the month, just in case there's any stuff they got to clean up. But at this point, they did pass the various appropriations bills to fund the government. And the best I can tell, though, the people who were most upset with the session, teachers, pharmacists, and members of the public employees retirement system, they're all feeling like they were left at the altar there, as the saying goes, the metaphor. Just a bridesmaid, but not the bride. Didn't get what they wanted. No PBM reform, no infusion of cash into the public employees retirement system, and the teachers got a pay raise that fell significantly short of what they anticipated, and certainly what was initially committed at the beginning of the session. Boy, it's always a tough deal when you go out and make a commitment that gets everybody excited, and then you come in and fall short of that. Ultimately, that's just always a difficult situation. That's what we have. The lieutenant governor, however, says that he's overall pleased, says, quote, it was a very good year. I wonder if that's the way the folks feel. He said he was very pleased overall with the legislature's work, which saw wins and losses that he talked about in his post-adjournment press conference after the gavel fell, signing dying the legislature out. So one of the things that he touted, which I think was good policy, reimbursing active members of the Mississippi National Guard for the cost of premiums for their TRICARE health insurance. So the purpose of that plan is just to enhance the medical readiness and ensure that they can retain qualified personnel in our National Guard. Also said that our best chance for economic development is an educated workforce. A lot of education discussed this session. That's the way he described the deliberations there in the Senate. And civics, financial literacy, Math Act, all included. in a big education bill, and they seem to be pretty pleased with that. Also, school attendance officers got a raise, $5,000. He says we need to get those students in the seats. I would offer this analysis. This is not a problem of needing more law. This is a problem of what's going on in the homes where these students live. Why in the world aren't they going to school? No laws are going to fix that. If we got to pass laws to ensure that whomever is serving as the parent, the guardian, raising these children to make sure they're in the schools, we got more serious problems, in my view. That's the thing we've got to address is why in the world do we have to come get you, force you, pay more school resource attendance officers, more money to police this issue? That's a fundamental, foundational problem. I get wanting to pass laws to address it, but something else is going on here that needs to be addressed. And the same is true with, I agree, an educated workforce is certainly an asset to have in your pocket in economic development. But as it stands right now, we got a lot of folks that are educated coming out of our high schools and our colleges that don't have a place to work. The bigger issue is we need a place for them to work, especially the knowledge workers that are coming out. Many of them bolt out of the state as soon as they get their degrees before the ink is dry on their diploma, as I like to say. He says he was happy, did the lieutenant governor, with the reforms to the public employees retirement system, and that centered around changing, actually reversing some of the provisions in the Tier 5 of the public employees retirement system implemented last year. But here's the thing, Rhino. Yeah, I get it. There was people upset about requiring 35 years to be eligible to retire at any age instead of 30, and using 8 years instead of 4 to calculate your retirement benefits. But guess what? Those were all designed to shore up the finances of PERS. So we just threw those out the window, back to where we were, coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
From the
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert, here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. Once again, Chris Towner joins us at 11:05 today. Chris is the policy director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So, on the C-Spire text line, Brandon from Cleveland. Isn't Delbert on his last term? I hope so. Not a big fan. I suspect you'll probably see him enter the race for governor. He is terming out as lieutenant governor. You were right about that, Brandon. But I think from all accounts, you can expect to see him be a candidate in the race for governor. That, of course, would be contested in 2027. Gary from Tishomingo, I certainly enjoyed your debate with Ellis Hennigan yesterday on Newsmax. Appreciate that, Gary. That was 7:25 a.m. our time. Rhino came up to the studio here, set the old laptop up, and did an interview. And this was about the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. Ellis Hennigan, a New York Times journalist, best-selling author as well. And I should say, a journalist and New York Times best-selling author. He's actually from New Orleans originally, was very active during the Obama years, kind of a surrogate for the Democrat Party. And we had, as we always do, this is the third time that Mr. Hennigan and I have been on a split-screen situation on Newsmax talking about different topics. Yesterday's was birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment. And I just simply maintain that, yeah, I get it. The justices are leaning towards striking down the president's executive order, which would end it. The president, of course, attended, first time ever, during a hearing that the president has been present for the proceedings in the Supreme Court. And so he was there last week, making his presence known. It does appear that the justices are leaning towards striking down his executive order, which would end all birthright citizenship because of the 14th Amendment, for starters, in our Constitution. But here's the thing. You pointed it out last week. We've got these birthright or birth tourism syndicates that are operating in China. $40,000 to $80,000, it's reported, is what it costs to get your way into the United States, for them to escort you in here and then drop that baby and boom, your child is an American citizen. I got to believe the CCP is behind that. I don't know how many people in China. There are a handful, no doubt. It's an interesting economy, kind of a hybrid between socialism, communism, and a little what the CCP lets occur is, I don't know if I'd call it capitalism, other than from the perspective that you get to keep some or a lot of what one earns. But that's very selective. That's not open to everyone. So I got a feeling that they're behind some of the funding for those who travel from China into the United States and then have a baby here. I think the CCP's behind it. I don't think our drafters anticipated that in the 14th Amendment, which was all about granting citizenship and equal rights to those who were previously enslaved in the Civil War. That was the purpose of that. There was a challenge to that in 1898. And that had to do, I hope I get the sequence here right, Rhino, but Chinese nationals that had a child who was an American citizen, moved back to China, came back in, and there was a challenge as to whether or not that child was still an American citizen. That went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court essentially affirmed that, yeah, they're still entitled to birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. So those are really the two aspects of this case that are driving, I think, the Supreme Court to likely decide that the president's EO is unconstitutional. That, the original 14th Amendment, and then this 1898 case. 14th Amendment, I believe, 1868. Is that right, Rhino? Do you recall that? And then, right. And then 98 was this Kim case, I believe is what is referred to. So we had a discussion about that. And I said, look, I do, that we have the strict text. It's funny, is it not, that all of a sudden the Democrats now are into the textual interpretation of the Constitution, because there's been times in the past, oh, no, that wasn't the intent. The Second Amendment comes to mind, right? This was for muskets to protect against the British, right?
They've spent longer than 200 years trying to wordsmith what well-regulated means.
That's exactly right. But in this case, oh no, we got to go with the strict interpretation, textual, not contextual, but textual interpretation, not intent. They're all about that now. You know, I've always said,
it's because they have no argument against the contextual or the intent. When you had the drafters of the 14th Amendment in the day writing in papers about how this was supposed to only be for slaves.
That's exactly right. But it has evolved since then dramatically. And what I said yesterday is, this wouldn't be such a big deal, and I don't think the president would be so enthusiastic about this were it not for the fact that we've had a stream of illegals crossing into this country for decades, and it just got ratcheted up significantly under Joe Biden, where he just basically said, hey, you ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, just stand down, look the other way, come on in, folks. And then we started spending money, flying them around, dispersing them into the country, putting them up in 5-star hotels and feeding them and letting them to participate in all the benefits that taxpayers pay for. I would make this argument. I said this to the Democrats. You know, you guys like to make this point, which is completely false all the time, that, well, if we didn't give all the tax breaks to the billionaires, we could have health care and child care and this and that and the other. No. You know what? If we didn't give those programs to all the illegals, there would be more availability of these resources and programs to legitimately needing American citizens. They never think about that.
Well,
they won't make that
They
point.
just fight against it because if you start reforming any of these handouts, suddenly their cash cow goes away.
That is exactly right. It's all about their personal power. They don't care about the illegals per se. They care about their power, and somehow, in a twisted, perverse way, they do derive political power from this because there's a bunch of idiots in the country that fashion themselves as just virtuous do-gooders. Oh, yeah, look at what we're doing for the illegals, and completely ignore...
You mean like the vast majority of people that claim they're trying to end homelessness?
Correct. That'd be
seemingly do everything but, because they know if they actually ended homelessness, they would no longer get paid to end homelessness?
Exactly right. Wouldn't have that in their political quiver, if you will. So we had a debate, and I just made that point. This is increasingly necessary because, and I think it's fair to say, could the founders, the drafters, could they envision a president that would say, open the borders up, guys? No, not in a million years. They never anticipated this. It's another situation where we didn't know we were going to have idiots in charge and would just fling the doors wide open. That fool James Tallarico, that's the Democrat candidate for Senate, having won the primary about a month ago in the great state of Texas, as they're barreling towards that very important election. He's the one, I mentioned this on the debate yesterday, who said our southern border should be like the front porch where we welcome everyone. The front porch to the nation. Oh, my gosh. But Hannikin, he had that smirk on his face because he felt pretty confident that he had the strict text of the Constitution on his side. And while I admit, Ellis, yeah, we should amend the Constitution. In my view, a child born here to an illegal should not be a citizen. If they're born to illegal, a citizen, sure. But think about how upside down this is. Diplomats, because there's an exception. It's explicit in the Constitution. They are not subject to our jurisdiction. It basically says if a child's born here to parents who are subject to our jurisdiction, well, then they're a citizen. But because these diplomats are here, they're actually not subject to our jurisdiction, technically, legally speaking. Children born to them are not American citizens. But the ones who come across here because cartels are getting paid to smuggle them in, or these Chinese syndicates, these birth tourist organizations that smuggle them in, oh, yeah, we just go ahead and dole them out a citizen card. Is that upside down or what? Jeez, we're stepping aside for a break. Final segment, hour one, and then Chris Towner at 11:05 with the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget in the Element Wealth Studio.
In Mississippi.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. I'm going to be live Thursday, April 9th from the South Highland Colony Parkway in Ridgeland. The Madison County Economic Development Authority will be discussing how they recruit and retain industries in the area, helping create thousands of jobs, billions in investment. I think we can expect a big announcement as well coming your way. Sports Talk Mississippi will be live at Scruggs Farm, Lawn and Garden in Saltillo on Wednesday for their Drive Green Spring Sales event. Check out their green savings on John Deere zero-turn mowers with 0% for 36 months, Gators with 1.9% for 39 months, compact tractors with 0% for 72 months, and other great deals. C Spire text line, it's wide open, 601-879-4395. Don't forget to go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income growth and guarantees. The market's in the green now. They've been moving a little bit around the unchanged line, not moving too much one way or another. I think traders cautiously optimistic about possibly getting this war behind us. And then, of course, they're all going to be focused on the president's remarks later on this afternoon. He issued another ultimatum, very strong warning, said we're going to start blowing up the power plants and the bridges by Tuesday if they don't open up the strait. Interesting. Let's see what else we have on the C Spire text line. They gave teachers a $2,000 raise, which is a slap in the face, especially after taxes. And then they turned around and gave judges in Mississippi about $11,000 in an annual raise. How does that work when we have teachers struggling to make ends meet? And that comes from a personal note. My wife is one. I hear you. Bottom line is, I think we're facing some difficult times ahead from a budgetary perspective. We've enjoyed handsome surpluses over the last few years, that largely because the federal government showered dollars across the nation as a result of the COVID, and that's coming to an end. And now the old chickens are coming home to roost, as they say. And so this is becoming a problem for lawmakers. It just reared its head just a little bit, slightly this year, but I think you can expect that to be a more serious problem next year, especially with what appears to be inflation gaining steam because of the price of oil. Now, again, I think the price of oil, once this thing's behind us, will retreat. Some of the analysts are saying back into that $65 to $70 a barrel range, which was slightly higher than where it was before the United States took action in Iran. I'm thinking it's more of just estimating here, pure speculation, in the $70 to $80 a barrel range. It's down a little bit today. Again, traders a bit optimistic that oil will begin flowing again through the Strait of Hormuz. But that's not clear at this point. It's not clear, I should say, that the regime, who the heck ever is in charge over there in Iran, will accommodate the president's request to open up. Not sure at this point what's going to happen there. So all these are factors playing into the state's budget. And don't forget that the income tax is being phased out. It's in small increments, but from last year to this calendar year, it did go down from 4.4 to 4%. So roughly an 11% decrease. And then next year it will go down to 3.75%, a quarter point reduction. And then in the subsequent 3 years, quarter points again before we get to the point in 2030 where we do some math to test whether or not further reductions can be made. But remember, there's a drafting error in the legislation. So it's almost a sure thing that we're going to proceed without changes, amendments to HB 1 that passed last year. phasing out the income tax over an extended period of time. But we might be looking at a situation where revenues are on the decline, where expenses are on the increase, such as in Medicaid, teacher pay raises, and then we still got the big PERS sword of Damocles hanging over the head. And like I said, some of the reforms in Tier 5 enacted last year were not very popular, weren't received well, and so lawmakers addressed that. But those were designed to improve the solvency of the program, so we're back to where we were to a great extent. There's still some other reforms, such as converting to a hybrid model, that will, in fact, improve the solvency, but not even remotely close to being enough to totally stabilize the program. We're taking a break. It's time for Fox News and SuperTalk News. On the other side, it's Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for...
Of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
And now, another hour of the talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Begin your transmission now.
Now on Super Talk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays. It is a Monday. That means Ricky Matthews, Super Talk Outdoors, comes your way at 12:05. Right now, it's Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Hey, Chris, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You bet. So you testified before the Congress here recently about the federal budget and the trajectory. We were just talking about it earlier, that the president did submit it in accordance with our law. The president proposes a budget, if you will, and that was transmitted down there to the Congress, and it incorporated a whopping 50% increase in the budget for what is now termed as the Department of War. That typically represents half of discretionary spending, the other half, the entire gambit of agencies that make up the other part of government's so-called non-defense domestic spending. Those two usually combined, equally split on the appropriation side. For last I checked, Chris, is about, 28% of total outlays. The other category, of course, mandatory. But there's concerns after seeing that we're going in the wrong direction here. We're looking at significant deficits as a result. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what was really notable about the president's budget last week is really what wasn't in there. There was not really a plan to get our fiscal situation under control. There was hardly really a plan to do much of anything except for increased defense spending. And when we're borrowing about, $2 trillion a year almost, we're seeing deficits at around 6% of the economy, which is roughly double the level of 3% that we think is sustainable. There are a lot of issues there, and we really need leadership from the president for how we can get ourselves out of that kind of situation.
And Chris, let's be honest, even 3%, which I think is a worthy goal, because that would be about half of what we have now, you're still bumping $1 trillion deficit there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important thing about when we talk about the deficit is, balance would be ideal. And we would love to get to balance, but we are so far out of balance at this point that, cutting deficits in half at the very least would make it so that the national debt is not growing as a share of the economy. And, it would take a lot to just get there. We're talking about $10 trillion of savings over the next decade. That's a lot, but it is manageable. But unfortunately, we have zero plans for how to get there right now. And most of what we hear from the president is he doesn't want to touch, Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. But those are the big drivers of spending in the federal budget. So you're going to have to touch those if you want to really get it under control.
You're right, but did you find it somewhat fascinating that I believe it was last Wednesday, as part of a press briefing he was delivering, he said, I'm quoting here, "It's not possible for us to take care of Medicare and Medicaid. They have to do it on a state basis. All these little scams, you have to let states take care of them. We have to take care of one thing, military protection." I think he also included in that series Medicare, Medicaid. I think he said daycare, if I'm not mistaken, as well, included in there. But this was a bit surprising, and the Democrats are pouncing on this, and you know they're going to be using this effectively in the midterms.
Yeah, you actually don't hear the president say very much about Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid that much these days. It was good to see him and hear him talk about that. But what we really need are, plans to actually get that under control. Like what was missing partially from his budget submission last week was, the fact that Social Security in just, under 7 years by 2032 will be completely exhausted. The trust fund will be totally empty. And at that point, the law says that we need to cut benefits by 24% across the board. And, the president's saying, yeah, we can't take care of that if we have to take care of the military, but we need a plan for how to do something about that to avoid that cut. I don't think any politician, including the president, would really want that cut to happen. But there's really no plan in place at all to deal with it.
And something else, Chris, that I noted, that it's certainly important to our audience here in the great state of Mississippi, is he said, hey, look, if it means that we send these programs to the states, you might have to raise taxes to pay for these. He actually said that in his comments. Am I right?
Yeah, and that is the reality, right? The president's, I think his remarks were a little bit muddled. Social Security and Medicare are both federal programs.
Right.
It would take a lot to try to turn them into state-based programs. But the reality is that, we actually don't have enough revenue to pay for the programs that we currently offer. If we were to try to hand them over to states would absolutely need to raise more revenue to finance them as well. And, it kind of goes to show you the challenge of our fiscal situation right now is that we want all these government services like, those programs, but we don't really want to pay for them with taxes.
The big one is Medicaid, Chris, from a state perspective, as you know, because that's a jointly funded program. We just had our legislature sine died for the 26th session. At least we think so. That's the official word. But the lieutenant governor said, but stay by your phone. We might be back. But here's where I'm going. Our lawmakers were hit with a significant request from our division of Medicaid, about a 30% increase in funding for the state's portion of that. In Mississippi, that's about $300 million, and the legislature essentially settled on $200 million, but Medicaid said, we're coming back. This isn't going to be enough for the... This is happening across the entire nation, is it not, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this is actually due to the One Big Beautiful Bill that passed last year. There were some provisions that cracked down on the way that states finance Medicaid. And in some ways, the provisions were very good policy because the states were kind of mismanaging how they should get federal match from the Medicaid program. And essentially, the federal lawmakers said, you know what, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for it yourselves. And they started implementing a lot of these changes. And then, as I think a lot of folks have heard, there's also going to be work requirements that are implemented over the next few years. And that's going to be really hard and expensive for states to do. But, if you want to achieve that significant savings for the federal government, it's going to have to push a little bit onto the states and ask them to produce a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, what you're talking about are the use of what are called provider taxes. Essentially, it's the healthcare industry that pays taxes to the state, so more federal dollars can be tapped to essentially pay for these services they're rendering under Medicaid. And in many cases, it makes people eligible for Medicaid. Otherwise, they'd be uninsured, and they're just absorbing those costs. Not as big an impact in Mississippi, and also the work requirement's not as big because we didn't expand Medicaid here. But still, the cost of Medicaid continues to, as health care in general, increase, and that's squeezing state budgets. Chris, I got to ask you this. I've talked about this on the show before. Just get your thoughts. The idea of transferring, I can see Medicaid down to the states and just letting states design programs as they see fit for that population and then fund it, which means likely they'd have to come up with more revenue to do so. But we could cut, $650 billion out of the federal budget right there.
Yeah, that's certainly been talked about, or at least changing the way that we finance the program so that maybe we just send states a lump sum on an annual basis and say, this is how you guys how much the federal government's going to pay for it. There is definitely, a cost benefit to that kind of approach. The federal government has a lot more taxing capacity than states do. There's just a lot more throughout the rest of the country, so that, there are some states where, they can't actually tax their people as much because they don't have nearly as much just revenue potential through economic growth and what have you. So those would be pretty severe changes, and I think a lot of people are concerned with how that would change the coverage. It might end up resulting in a lot fewer people getting benefits. That's a trade-off that's involved in budgeting, and we got to evaluate those things. If these are the programs we want to do, we either need to fund them further, or we need to, make some tough calls about whether or not we should be funding them.
Yeah, we got a break right here. If you can hang around, we can keep talking, if you're good.
Sure.
Yep. Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. I'm going to leave you with this thought, something I've said on the program before. If the federal government balanced its budget by cutting spending, just conceptually, that would cause virtually every state budget in America to immediately crash. Think about that. We'll talk about it on the other side of the break. Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's do this.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Let's go.
When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. We're visiting with Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So, Chris, we run up $39 trillion of debt. That exceeds our GDP, which last I checked is hovering somewhere around $30 trillion. So we're, 1.2 or so, 1.3 of that. And that's a concern, maybe a bigger concern than anything, is that ratio more so than just the actual absolute value of deficits and debt. It's something that affects bond markets and the status of the dollar and all that sort of stuff. Much like it does in the private sector, when you look at a company's balance sheet and you look at their debt relative to lots of other denominators, doesn't seem like there's any change in the trajectory of that at this point. But we're literally borrowing money to fund programs that funnel money down to the states. So here in Mississippi, we're able to balance our budget. We have to. Most states do. They have a legal obligation to do so. And we celebrate that, which is fine, because we are in Mississippi. I would say our lawmakers are responsible. They're fiscally responsible. We don't go out and budget to spend more than we take in. But we're fortunate in that we get a lot of money from the federal government. For example, our Medicaid program, combined federal and state, is about $8.5 billion. Our general fund budget is $7.3 billion. Our Medicaid program's bigger than our general fund budget. And about half of what the federal government sends us, according to my calculations, is borrowed. It's just a dangerous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is also the case for most states as well. Most states are receiving a lot of their funding for their state budgets in the form of Medicaid spending from the federal government. And, the more that we continue to borrow, the more it's going to affect us pretty poorly. The more money that the federal government has to borrow, that's less money that's going into private investment and growing the economy. And, it's also contributing to the kind of large bouts of inflation that we saw over the past few years. So we still have stubborn inflation. We're like 3 or 4 years now of pretty high price growth. And part of that is because we refuse to get our borrowing under control.
Yeah, and you just don't hear members of Congress talk about it. I mean, they seem to talk about it on the campaign trail. Let's go up there and be fiscally responsible. And, we as voters, I say this all the time, we send them on our way. You go up there and be fiscally responsible. But you know what? You send all that money home that you can get your hands on. And when you multiply that by 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, you end up with $39 trillion in debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you often hear about, yes, let's be fiscally responsible, but there's the logical next step that no one ever talks about, which is, okay, how are we going to actually do that? Are we going to raise taxes? Are we going to cut spending?
Right.
Are we going to do both of those things? And no one wants to do any of those things. So we just talk about, okay, let's spend some more, let's cut some taxes some more, and then our borrowing goes up further, and that's the opposite of fiscal responsibility.
And your organization does projections. Typically, we do that on a 10-year basis. Anytime, and I have to remind the folks that all the time, anytime you hear anyone in government spouting all these various figures regarding our budget and how various reforms and provisions affect it, it's always done on a 10-year basis. It's not usually on an annual basis. So it depends on the point you're trying to make. It can either look better or worse depending on what point you're trying to make. I don't think the average person understands. They're not talking about in a year. They're talking about 10 years.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And when I say we're borrowing $2 trillion, I mean we're currently borrowing $2 trillion in this year. Right?
Exactly.
Deficits over a decade, they are closer to $25 trillion.
Right.
We're talking about a significant amount of money. And when you hear lawmakers saying, oh, well, my bill's going to save $1 billion. Well, over 10 years, that's really not that much money. We're talking about pennies at that point. We need, savings talking in the hundreds of billions and perhaps trillions of dollars to make a real dent in our borrowing.
So one good thing is there's been more exposure, more focus, more news about fraud, defrauding various federal programs, maybe in the last 6 months to a year than I can think of for decades. It just all happened sort of behind the scenes, under covers. Nobody ever said much about it. But you always felt like something was going on. We've seen this huge fraudulent scam in Minnesota, and now what's going on in California is just mind-boggling. I get the feeling, I've said this many times on the show, that the culprit here are these various grant programs. It seems like it's always grant programs that just get scammed to heck and back. What should we do? I've actually said maybe we just ought to end all grant programs, at least until we get control of this stuff.
Yeah, I think we absolutely should try to root out as much waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. There's certainly, we're talking about maybe, hundreds of billions of dollars over a decade that we could save in order to do that. But really the main culprits of our borrowing and our spending growth is the programs that have like the lowest amounts of fraud in the federal government. So Social Security doesn't have a lot of fraud.
Right.
We know that we get about 99% of payments right, and that's great. But we do know that it is contributing a lot to our fiscal challenges because we just don't have enough money to fund it. Medicare is a little bit different of a story. We think that there's a lot more fraud in Medicare than maybe other federal programs. But even then, Medicare is about $1 trillion a year. We're talking about maybe $30 billion of fraud. That's not nothing. We should try to root that out for sure. But it's also not going to fix the challenges that we have with that. Really, we're spending a lot and just not taking in enough in taxes. Like that is the core of the issue. We could have zero fraud in the federal government, but we'd still have a deficit. According to most estimates from Government Accountability Office and really the experts on waste, fraud, and abuse. So we absolutely should tackle those things, but they're not the silver bullet for our issues.
Yeah, I agree with you, but you hear some lawmakers and certainly some surrogates and analysts say, yeah, if we could just eliminate all that, we'd balance the budget. Well, I don't know that we have $2 trillion of fraud in the $7+ trillion budget. That would be a lot. The Doge team came in thinking they were going to find $1 trillion, and they ended up backing that down to about $115 billion when it was said and done. And about half of that was in process before they ever started. So it really didn't root out a lot. But you got these mandatory programs. Even if you're rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse, you got the mandatory programs that are on autopilot, and they're just rapidly offsetting and actually exceeding any findings in the fraud area.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that if waste, fraud, and abuse were the culprit of all of our borrowing, that would be a much easier conversation to have. But the reality is that, we have all these mandatory programs that are growing pretty rapidly. Federal healthcare programs are a huge portion of our budget. And not to mention that even if we were to get, like a lot of the spending programs under control, the mandatory spending programs, we're still spending about $1 trillion a year on interest on the national debt. You can't cut that, right? You have to make those payments in order to, have the ability to borrow more. That is going to be a huge problem. It's a huge and growing problem already. There's a concept called primary balance, which is that where your non-interest spending is greater than your or is lower than your revenue. We have about a 2%, primary deficit, but we're borrowing about we're paying about 3% on interest on the debt alone. So you really get into a big issue. Even if we were to balance the rest of the budget, we're spending so much on interest that we're going to have to borrow more just to pay that interest.
And Chris, what about the issue of having to refinance some of those treasuries at higher interest rates as they term out and mature, and we pay those principal off? Then we got to go back because we don't have the money just to do without that debt. That could increase our costs as well, right?
Yeah, that's a huge cause of concern right now, especially over the last few years. We shifted from borrowing around on a 10-year basis to borrowing at like a 3-month basis. That massively increased our interest cost with the hopes that, okay, when we need to refinance that down at some point, we can do it over a 10-year period at a lower interest rate. But 10-year treasuries are pretty high and rising, especially with the turmoil we've seen caused by the conflict in the Middle East. We're going to have to borrow at higher and higher interest rates, and it's going to make our interest burden that much worse.
Appreciate you coming on, Chris. Always enjoy the conversation and very valuable and deep insight into the federal government's budget. Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Wealth studio.
From the Seabrook.
Now is with Gerard Gibert.
It is
on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Well, that was a good conversation with Chris Towner, Policy Director, Committee for a Responsible Budget. And those are just the facts and the reality, my friends. And it's something that is certainly hitting the state of Mississippi right upside the face here with the recent legislature's work on our budget. Knowing that looks like we're going to have to spend more money on Medicaid from the state's perspective to make ends meet, to match up with the federal government's share to ensure that we receive what the federal government sends us to operate the program. And that's causing problems throughout the state's budget. It's the primary reason why teacher pay raises weren't higher than they were. And it's likely to cause problems as well or mean that there's less money available for some of the local projects that I know a lot of those folks in our municipalities and counties are expecting. And then it may have been a factor in the legislature gaveling out for the session without doing anything about the public employees retirement system as well. But it is an issue. And it's not going away, and it's especially concerning if we start to see the trend that revenues are decreasing and trending downward. So that at the same time of expenses increasing, that's pretty obvious. That causes problems for the state's budget, and we got to be concerned about that. So we shall see for sure. It's going to be a problem going forward, I believe. Crimea River, what about the rest of state workers, says Neil from Pontotoc, referring to the $2,000 teacher pay raise that was passed in the 2026 session, which is certainly less than originally committed. And I hear you, Neil, that I've heard the same thing. State employees are also speaking out that, hey, what about everybody else besides just the teachers? And no action on that in a while, right? Last increase they had, it's been some time. And
in fairness, it is a bit apples and oranges to compare the judges getting a pay raise and the teachers getting a pay raise because there are something like 130 some odd judges compared to the 30+ thousand teachers. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
You're looking at even if you gave every judge $13,000, you're looking at less than $2 million added to the budget compared to over $100 million, close to $150, depending on how you do the math for teacher pay raise.
Yeah, it's a function of the numbers in general, and all a problem. For sure. Oh, man. I don't know. But they're out of town at this point. And, not a serious problem this year, but it's going to become one, is what I fully do believe. And the federal government, of course, has the luxury of just spending money they don't have. They can go out and borrow money unabated, and that's why we keep adding to our debt, and our interest cost continues to rise, and our deficits are problematic, but certainly not something that is going to go away and going to continue to be a problem. But the president, I give it to him for calling attention to it, that, maybe we don't need to be in the Medicare, the Medicaid, and the daycare business, as he says. All of that is a problem, and that it costs money. He says we're fighting a war. We got to worry about that. And I tend to agree with him in the respect that, our government has just evolved into this giant slush fund for child care and daycare and Medicare and Medicaid. Now, I get it. Folks will say, well, Medicare, we pay into that. And I understand. Me too. And thus, we should receive our benefits that we paid for out of it. That's why he's always said historically, we're not going to touch it. But that's not what happened last Wednesday. He actually said we can't afford all that stuff. It's wartime, and we got to get on it. And that was, came as a bit of a shock. So now the left says, oh, yeah, well, during wartime, we actually can afford these things. And there was federal child care centers across the United States back in World War II. It's just crazy how the Democrats bring that up and try to make some false equivalence out of all that. Oh, man. That's after the president said the United States can't take care of daycare because we have to take care of one thing, military protection. We have to guard the country. But the Democrats say, yeah, history shows we actually can do both. I just think they missed the whole point here is that we're running these huge deficits, we're racking up the debt, and it's primarily driven by these various programs that have just exploded through the years. And now, of course, all of the exposure of the massive amount of misspending in those programs in the way of fraud in a big way. And so I'm glad that is getting attention and hopefully will be certainly addressed. But that's what Neil from Pontotoc says. Yeah, we should also be concerned about our state employees. They haven't gotten anything. That these teachers, I'm just pointing out that they're none too happy given that they expected much significantly higher raise, and it came in at $2,000 as opposed to a $5,000 and a $6,000 as floated earlier on in the session. I don't know if the other states will respond as they did last time we gave raises to our teachers and they increased their teacher pay. Of course, that puts pressure on us to increase our teacher pay to stay competitive with the neighboring states and to retain our educators in the hopes that they will not leave our state for another state where the pay is higher. That's always the risk. So that's what's going on there, but I don't think that issue is going away. I wouldn't be surprised to see that come up again in the next legislative session in 2027, although it is an election year. Not really sure about that. President also, of course, he has put the vice president over a group that is going to be investigating fraud in all these various programs and hopefully root out that. And as you heard Chris Towner from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget says, definitely we need to address that, but it's not nearly enough to solve the problem of massive deficits and racking up a huge amount of debt. Patrick in Louisville says, why is it that everyone who takes a government job, whether state or local, they love the retirement insurance, time off, but complain about pay? When you take a government job, you have to recognize you have no control over your benefits. Well, I understand what you're saying, Patrick. Makes sense. You know what you signed up for, but it could be a situation where when they went to work, they felt like the pay was reasonable. When they accepted those jobs, the pay was reasonable, and they evaluated the total package, which is certainly what most prospective employees do. They look at the total compensation package, which also includes benefits and just the work environment and structure. No doubt about that, but that can change over time. So, yeah, it was fine during the period and when you went to work there, but over time, it didn't keep up, and that's causes problems. That's kind of what's happening here, I would say, with Mississippi being at the bottom of the stack with respect to teacher pay. It's just a big expense, and it's especially hard to address when, again, you're looking at the prospect of decreasing revenues, inflation increasing expenses throughout government, and the federal government putting the clamp down on a lot of the money that it showers upon the states.
It's also a problem that if you ever were to suggest a merit-based raise program for teachers, you would be castigated for being against education.
That's exactly right.
Even though the good teachers would get raises.
And I'm all for that. I think we ought to figure out a way to implement merit in compensation throughout government, not just in teachers, but there are ways we could get creative and design programs that would reward those who perform in an extraordinary fashion. We've been doing it in the private sector forever,
but
essentially.
I'd be willing to bet the education lobby would fight against it.
There's no doubt about that. Coming right back with the final segment is Eric Clapton. Derek and the Dominoes bumps us out of this segment.
Up a miss. Are we going to do this? Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Keep rolling. 3, 2, 1.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Shake, Sinora, shake your body liner. Shake.
Welcome back, everyone. Middays from the Element Wealth Studio, final segment on this Monday. Ricky Matthews, Super Talk Outdoors. After the break, at the top of the hour, the president's pushing to privatize TSA screening. I'm all for it. Oh, wait a second. I got something going on my machine. Okay. I'm all for it. He's pushing for that. And right now there's a squabble going on between the House and Senate as to opening up the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, the Democrats just don't want any part of ICE. They don't want them to get any money. They want to shut the whole deadgum program down. It's just amazing in this country that Democrats are prioritizing illegals over American citizens. Now, on social media this weekend, a Democrat jumped on me for using the word illegal, referring to them as that. And
if you get bent out of shape over the usage of the term illegal, you're a bleeding heart blowhard that needs to go sit in your garage and think about how dumb you are.
Well, this is what was funny. They view that as an insult, as a pejorative, if you will. And so, folks that follow me know that I like to talk about business and free markets, free enterprise, capitalism. I love it when companies succeed, when individuals succeed at all levels, and they are able to leverage and enjoy the system that we have here in this country. Is it perfect? No, not whatsoever. Is it better than all the rest? In my view, yes. We got to keep working on it. Our founders told us that. We get it. But so this individual said, well, is there a particular insulting term or name we could use to describe you? I said, sure, have at it. You want me to apologize because I happen to shape myself and cast myself as a capitalist? Sure, knock yourself out. Am I supposed to be embarrassed and hiding from that? I mean, that's how they think. Like there's something bad about that. All the while they're
because your brain has to be broken to vote Democrat in the year of our Lord 2026.
It's unbelievable.
You don't have fully functioning processes inside your skull if you're still a flaming, bleeding heart liberal in the year of our Lord 2026.
Well, you watch. Coming up in the midterms, to your point, they're going to focus on two things. I'm telling you. Donald Trump's a bad guy. That's going to be number one. You know, oh, my gosh. And then the second that they're really riding this wave is taxing the wealthy. They're just big time riding that horse all the way into the midterms. And you're going to hear the word billionaire said more times than you can shake a stick at. Between now and November, it's billionaire, billionaire, billionaire. That's all you're going to hear. Meantime, there's this movement across the country. This is so dumb, in my view, to put a moratorium on data centers. Ohio, They're looking to get 400,000 signatures by July to get a ballot on measure, I should say, on the ballot come November to totally ban data centers in the state of Ohio. Unbelievable. You've got all these activists going to social media, and they are highlighting, honestly, what are just a bunch of lies about data centers and artificial intelligence, but tapping into the ignorance, unfortunately, of voters. You got the left-wing consortium in the United States Congress consisting of AOC and Bernie Sanders. They're teaming up, going around the country. No data centers! But they'll let you know in a hurry it's not because of their fear of what these massive facilities might impose on the environment, but it's because they may make money doing it. But I maintain, folks, this is misguided. If we start to put up obstacles and roadblocks to expanding the technology economy in this country, you might as well just hand it off to China, is what would happen. Derailing data centers would harm a lot more than just our innovation and our progression into artificial intelligence. The state of Maine is set to pass legislation that would make it the first state to ban new construction. 11 states have brought similar legislation to enact a total moratorium. This ignores what made the country great, in my view.
Every single bloviating BS that comes out of a Democrat's mouth flies in the face of what made this country great.
I just think they've
gone so far off the reservation that they don't even know what reality looks like. They want men in women's bathrooms. They want the Supreme Court to be 30 freaking people, all liberals. They don't know how to run the railroad, let alone govern a country.
100%. Here's what I believe. That banning something such as data centers, which instill innovation, that's antithetical to human progress and the principles that made this country great, in my view. Out of here today, back tomorrow. Stay safe and God bless.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.